everyone, this is Alenka from Sectum Psycho, and today I'm back with another literature review or like literature talk about a very special book that is very dear to my heart. This is about a Harry Potter fanfiction by the name of All the Young Dudes. If you're a Marauders fan, you probably know this fanfiction. If you don't know what the Marauders are basically a group of friends from the original Harry Potter books. They consist of 4 main characters: Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, James Potter, the father of Harry, and Peter Pettigrew. This is a fanfiction about their life at Hogwarts, and it takes place in the 70s. It is a fanfiction that you can read on AO3. I'll leave the link in the bio so you can read it if you want. And I actually decided to print it. It consists of 3 books. 2 of them are about the school years, and the last book is about the war, First Wizarding War. If you can't tell, I tried to channel the Marauders in my outfit today. The hat is for Lily Evans, the leather jacket is for Sirius Black, Gryffindor Quidditch shirt is for James, and the scars on my face, which are all fake by the way, don't worry, are for Remus Lupin. All the Young Dudes is a Harry Potter fanfiction written by an author called Mrs. Kingbean89 on Archive of Our Own AO3, the website that I mentioned before. It is a fanfiction with over 500,000 words, and it covers the time period of 27 years. It starts from when they first arrive at Hogwarts until shortly before Order of the Phoenix starts. It is told from the perspective of Remus Lupin. While reading the fanfiction, we watch him grow up, discover his sexuality, fight in the war, and deal with events of the Harry Potter series. It is a canon-compliant fanfiction, which means that it adds on to the canon. It doesn't change the canon, it adds onto it. It basically fills the Marauders timeline, because if you read the books, you never really get enough of the Marauders to really make a consistent timeline. Fanfiction basically fills in what you want to know about the Marauders that you don't know or that the canon does not give you. It focuses a lot on Wolfstar, which, if you don't know what Wolfstar is, shipping name of Remus Lupin and Sirius Black. As of April 2021, if you search all of Archive of Our Own on hits, the first fanfiction that you will land on is All the Young Dudes. So this just shows how huge this fanfiction is. It is so huge that it's even the biggest one through hits on Archive of Our Own. The story was originally posted from March 2017 to November 2018, I believe. Most of the clout that the fanfiction gained arrived December 2020, when Harry Potter really started blowing up on TikTok and a whole new generation found the Harry Potter books and movies. Introduced a lot of new readers to the Harry Potter canon and also to the Harry Potter fanfiction, which is really beautiful because, as you know, the author J.K. Rowling wrecked Harry Potter for a lot of people, and through this whole taking back Harry Potter for what it is and putting away the author, not giving them any credit and kind of making it your own, that's really beautiful. And many fans consider this fanfiction canon. I do too, because I'll get into why, but the characters are so fleshed out and it just makes sense. It is also one of my favorite books I've ever read, because I do not consider this just a fanfiction. I consider this a real book. I consider this art. I consider this a novel. Some prefer to look at the All the Young Dudes influenced Marauder fandom differently than from the Harry Potter fandom, and particularly because of Rowling's controversial statements, which is really beautiful. I think that you can like separate the two and you can take All the Young Dudes and the Marauders and just relive it through the eyes of what you want it to be. As I said, the author is a user called Miss Kingbean89. We do not know who the author is. I could be the author. Am I the author? No, I wish. The identity is not known, which gives it this whole mystery kind of, and there are like inside jokes in the fandom that Taylor Swift is the author, but that is more or less a joke. That way it can also never turn sour because of an author's weird homophobic, transphobic statements, you know. Not saying that Miss Kingbean is, but if she ever was, we would never know, and that way All the Young Dudes fanfiction would never get tainted, in a sense. And now I'm gonna get into spoiler territory, so if you want to read All the Young Dudes, the most tragic things that happen, you already know if you have read the Harry Potter books. And this is a spoiler for Harry Potter in general, don't continue. James Potter and Lily Potter both passed away through Voldemort. We know that that is basically the whole start of Harry Potter's story. We also know that Remus Lupin and Sirius Black eventually pass away. We know that most of the Marauders pass away, basically, and that is not a secret. But you know what? That information does not help you in this fanfiction, okay? It only, frankly, makes it worse because you know what's coming, and every sweet moment, you just know that this is lingering, which I think makes it even worse. So just a spoiler warning for Harry Potter books and for all the young dudes. The main character is Remus Lupin. Moony. Remus Lupin probably is my favorite Harry Potter character. He is a werewolf. He got transformed into a werewolf when he was bitten when he was around 4 or 5 years old by the werewolf Greyback. In the story, he doesn't grow up with two loving parents. After Remus is bitten, his father Lyle blames himself for the tragedy because he worked for the Ministry of Magic, especially in the werewolf prevention or like care for magical creatures, and he blamed himself and shortly after took his life, which shattered Remus's mother Hope because she was a muggle. She now had this child which every month turned into an absolutely dangerous creature, and she couldn't deal with that. She was very young, she couldn't handle it, and so she put Remus into a boys' home. So one of the things that I absolutely loved in this fanfiction is Remus's characterization. Now, if you know Remus through Prisoner of Azkaban, you might know him as a caring, very silent, like quiet man, but in the fanfiction, Remus basically comes from this boy home. He's very poor, he never had anything really for himself. Also, where he grew up, his language was influenced by it. When he comes to Hogwarts, it is obviously an extremely crazy situation because he meets his friends, like he meets Sirius, he meets James, he meets Peter, and he realizes that all of them are very posh because all of the three boys that all grew up in pure blood magical households, which means they come from a lot of wealth and a lot of like higher status and just pure bloods in general. They grew up with this whole magical world and they talk very posh, and Remus is just a direct contrast to them. Like he doesn't he talks very differently. In the beginning, in the first year, he's very edgy. He's very much this bad boy persona, boy who doesn't want to kind of adhere to rules, but that is basically just because there is so much anger about his past, about who he is. He's just angry all the time. And also he cannot read. Well, he can read, but he's dyslexic, so he has problems like looking at the sentences and they kind of switch up, and he can't read, which also does not help because he's so insecure that he does not tell anyone that, and he does not let other people help him. I think his whole characterization makes sense with his canon characterization. I think it's very realistic, seeing as in the beginning he's only 11 years old, as I said, and there's a lot of time for a character to grow, and especially from his character growth between when he first started Hogwarts, which was in 1970 something, and then in Prisoner of Azkaban, which was in the 90s. So there's 20 years on it. I mean, we all go through massive change in 20 years. So in a way, the big change in his character kind of really shows what he's been through in all those years. Most fanfictions, apart from all the young dudes, kind of exaggerate his quiet, shy bookworm persona. His anger is very much justified, where he comes from, and it is also very well described in the fanfiction, and you can always see where the anger comes from. And it's also, I mean, they are teenagers, emotions are all over the place. I also love, and that sounds weird, but I love the fact that he grew up in a care home, because I think it makes the Marauder found family so much more special, because he never really had a family, never really knew what it means to grow up around people that actually love you for what you are. Sorry, I had to take off the jacket and the hat. It was getting very warm. I'm gonna read you a quote that shows Remus's feelings when he first realizes that he has friends for the first time, and that is in his first year. It was James who had an ego the size of the lake, but a heart to match it. Peter, who, yes, granted, was weird and a bit clueless, actually had a wicked sense of humor and could be unfailingly generous. And of course, Sirius. Sirius could keep secrets, had a mean streak but never directed it at his friends, was the most gifted student in the year but spent all his time coming up with pranks instead. Remus wasn't going to give any of that up, not if he could help it. Even if he had to be the swottiest student in school, if he had to force himself to read every book, complete every assignment, follow every rule,
He'd be so good they wouldn't know what hit him. So good they'd have to make him a prefect. He'd do it all if it meant staying at Hogwarts and keeping his friends.
Okay, next character, Sirius Black. He's very rebellious because he grew up in this family where he is expected to be the heir of the noble house of Black. His family is very strict. Their views are very pure-bloodish. They discriminate against Muggleborns. They are just very noble house family. And Sirius is kind of rebelling against it, which always gets him in trouble. But he doesn't care, and he kind of does a lot of things on purpose to just piss off his mother usually, such as befriending James Potter. His parents explicitly told him not to do. He also gets a lot of shit when he gets sorted into Gryffindor instead of Slytherin because all of his family before was sorted into Slytherin, but obviously it's not his fault, but still he gets a lot of shit for that. Sirius is very much a flirt, he's very extroverted. He's also direct, but he's just very the life of the party. He's also with James, they are the most famous Gryffindors, and like everyone kind of loves them. But he's very, very loyal. He does things before thinking them through. Can get angry very quickly, and he's also very dramatic. He has a sense for dramatic entrances, dramatic exits. He's just a dramatic person. Now moving on to Peter Pettigrew. Peter is also a pureblood wizard. Peter mostly is just known because he betrayed his friends, but there's so much more to Peter. He was a shy guy, but he can also be kind of snappy. He can also make funny, witty comments. He's really good at astrology, and I think he's sometimes really underrated, obviously because he betrayed his friends, but he was also part of the Marauders, and that's what people tend to forget. He was their friend. That's what makes the whole story so much more tragic, because if you're betrayed by a friend, someone you thought you could trust so much that you make them secret keeper, betrays you, you know? Yeah. My second favorite Marauder is probably James. James is also from a pureblood family. He's very rich, he's grown up with two loving parents, and he's very much the mom friend of the group. That's why I love him so much. He's just so loyal towards his friends. He wants to protect them at all costs. He always knows what to say. He's just such a loving soul. Very extroverted, but also just has such a kind, good heart. I love James. I think he has so many witty and funny moments in this book, and he's very much the leader of the Marauders. Now moving on to Lily Evans, later Lily Potter. Lily is also, I think, kind of an underrated character in the fandom in general. She's just so smart and so witty, and she's just always rejecting James, which leads to so many funny moments, and especially when she realizes that she actually has feelings for him as well. She's just so honest and so kind also, but also is not afraid to stand up for what's right, and also she often stands up against James and Sirius, puts them in their place basically. Now, just to make it clear, the Marauders are Peter, James, Sirius and Remus. Those are the Marauders. But in the Marauders era, there is Lily and more characters, and two other characters that I also consider main characters in this fanfiction are Marlene McKinnon and Macdonald. When I first read about these characters, I thought that they were OC's original characters, but turns out they are actually canon. Marlene McKinnon is mentioned by Sirius in the Order of the Phoenix. She was also part of the Order of the Phoenix, and Sirius basically talks about how her whole family was killed by Voldemort. And Macdonald also is briefly mentioned, like in one sentence in the whole book, where Lily tells someone that another guy was bullying Mary. So both of the characters actually are canon in the universe. We basically don't know anything about them in the canon universe, but that is where all the young dudes comes in. Marlene McKinnon is a witch, and in the beginning she's very shy, she's very calmed, but she gets more extroverted by the longer the book goes on, and she's very fierce. Marlene in the fanfiction is also a very talented witch, especially with medical or like healing abilities. She's also very clever, especially she always studies with Remus, Mary, and Lily in the library. Okay, another character that I said is Mary Macdonald. Now, Mary Macdonald is just known by her name in the canon universe. In fanfiction, she is a Muggle-born witch. She is a very fierce, very extroverted, very funny, very also kind of sexual in later girl. She's always dating, she's always interested in men, she's very self-confident. She is described as curvy, so she always flaunts it and she's just very confident in herself. And also her Patronus is also a lioness, which I think just fits so perfectly. And I love her and I love everything about her, and she is the only marauder, or like the only person of the marauder era that ended up living. Now, how can one talk about all the young dudes without talking about Grant Chapman? Grant Chapman is an original character made up by Miss King being 98. He's basically Remus's roommate. He lives with him in his dorm, in his care home, and they meet in summer after the 4th year of Hogwarts. He's basically Remus's sexual gay awakening. Like, he has his first intimacy and like sexual relations with a boy, and he realizes that he is not straight, he is attracted to men. Grant Chapman, he's such a loving guy, he is so funny. Obviously he's also in the care home later. He cares for Remus, he always cares for Remus. He phones him when he's in Hogwarts, he always gives him advice. Grant loves Remus, he absolutely loves him, but he never pressures Remus to love him back. Let's just say Grant deserved better. Remus loved Grant to a certain extent, but as he says it himself, he wasn't Sirius. He could never be what Sirius was to Remus. Okay, so I'm not gonna tell you all of the things that happened because it's such a large book and I would be here all day just talking about it, but I'm gonna go into a few of my favorite moments that I want to discuss, and then I will go into deeper significances and which themes I really enjoyed, but I'll just show you a few of my favorite scenes. So the first one is Remus's toast, Moony toast. I think it's such a simple thing, but it really explains Remus beautifully. Basically the Remus toast, Moony toast scene is when in chapter 7 Remus spreads 4 different toppings on each side of a toast, or a quarter of a toast. It kind of shows how Remus appreciates the little things given his limited choices in growing up, and he wants to try everything, is not used to having that much of a choice, so he can't choose, so he chooses all of them. I think it's also very endearing when later in chapter 17 at Remus's birthday, Sirius surprises him with a 4-flavor birthday cake. Many sweet illustrating moments how much Sirius just wanted to make Remus feel at home or feel special. It also contributes to the slow burn that is this series for Wolfstar. Another one of my favorite moments is when Sirius helps Remus read. As I said, Remus is dyslexic, or he has troubles reading, and Sirius often throughout the novel frequently demonstrates his awareness, or he has acute awareness of Remus and seeing through his werewolf facade as well, but also discovering his hidden truth. In chapter 13, for example, Sirius gives Remus the best Christmas gift ever, which is a spell, and the spell makes or helps Remus read in his head. When he reads a line, it's basically a voice in his head that tells him what he's reading, so he helps him read basically. And this plot line is so wholesome, but it also kind of foreshadows the tragic ending of the series. Sirius starts associating Remus with secrets. There's also this line where he says, "Tell me a secret, a nice one." That's what he always tells Remus when they're cuddling, "Please tell me a secret," which is very cute at first, very wholesome, very loving, but it's heartbreaking because later when Sirius suspects Remus of secretly being a spy against the Order, which just breaks my heart because logically, if you think about it objectively, it's war. I mean, we can't even contemplate, or like we can't even think of how broken everything must have been, but logically, objectively, if you think about it, Remus must have been the most logical choice for them to think who was the spy, because his wolf pack, the way he had secrets before, and it's just heartbreaking, and it's very well written, and it is very much foreshadowing, and I think Miss King Bean wrote that foreshadowing beautifully. Honestly, it's perfect. Another thing that is very dear to my heart and every Harry Potter fan is the origins of the Marauders map. Mrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs are proud to present the Marauders map. Now what I think is really beautiful is that they explain why Mooney was first, because Mooney was the one who actually started off with creating this map. It's even more impressive considering it was made with magic. which is not for such young students. Like you should have been way older for all of this magic. I also really appreciate the way Miss Kingbean showed its beginning. Remus started this map. He just found his way around the castle and wanted to write down everything that he found that was not on the official map that they had given them. It gives him kind of a sense of ownership over Hogwarts. It's his home. It's the first home he's ever really had. Perfect sense for him to create a map where everything is written down. It is a legacy of him and also of his group. Now the Marauders wouldn't be the Marauders without their infamous pranks. There are a few favorite pranks that I like, but I think I'm gonna go into two of them here, and one of them is the Halloween 1973 prank. It's basically a word swap spell. Pure blood supremacy, or like the students that practice the pure blood supremacy are very much known for shouting insults at Muggleborns. The Marauder found a way to turn it all into something funny. What they did is basically they exchanged words, so every time a racist, or like they would say something racist, it would be swapped with another word. So let's say they would say mudblood, but what would come out was angelic sweetie pops. Such a smart prank. On the one hand, it's just funny to hear those pretentious Slytherin students, I am Slytherin too, by the way, so those pretentious Slytherin students that say those things say words that they would never say out loud. On the other hand, it also saves the Muggleborn students some slack. It just gives them a time to breathe and calm down. They don't have to deal with all the insults for once. And it just shows how caring they actually are. I mean, it's a prank that is bad on the ones that choose to be bad, you know? So it's always the kind of punishing who deserves to be punished or who chooses themselves to want to be punished, if that makes sense. I think another one of my favorite pranks is when they mess with the time. Now, the original idea was that there's this big head clock, controls all the other clocks basically, and the Marauders decided that they would turn it back 5 minutes, like that they could sleep longer, but it escalates. And they don't know what time it is anymore, and it confuses the whole of Hogwarts that they stand up in the middle of the night suddenly, and at 11 a.m. it is actually 12 p.m. and in the morning is actually the evening. It confuses everyone and no one knows what time it is, and it escalates so much that Dumbledore has to step in and kind of fix it all up because no one knows what time it is anymore. And actually, I was really scared because I thought that they would lose track of when Moony's next transformation was going to be, and I thought there was going to be a whole thing of him transforming out of the blue, but luckily that didn't happen because oh my god, that would have been tragic. But yeah, really good prank that escalated, just funny scene, and yeah. I will go into the whole of Wolfstar's relationship later, but I think one of the most beautiful scenes is when Remus realizes that he has feelings for his best friend. Remus is made prefect. If you're a prefect, you are getting a badge. It's made out of silver. Now, what are werewolves resistant to? Silver. So Dumbledore, the asshole, gave Remus a silver badge, even though he knows he's a werewolf. Sirius actually transforms the badge from silver to tin so that he can actually wear it. Remus thanks him and is completely astonished that Sirius did that for him, and he's like,
"Don't be silly." Sirius shook his head, still smiling, eyes soft. "Anything for our Moony. Good night." He turned and crept back to his bed. Remus fell back onto his pillows, exhaling heavily, still clutching the pin so tight it bit into his palm. He flung the covers over his head and willed his heart to stop pounding. "Oh God," he thought grimly. "I fancy Sirius Black."
Oh, it's such a relief when you read that. It's like, after fight, look, you had to go through all of this, okay? This is all slow burn. This is basically year 1 to 4. Nothing happens. Well, nothing. Like, huge happens to Wolfstar in this. Like, they have their cute moments, yes, as I said, the reading thing and all that stuff, but it's not romantical, obviously, because they're kids. But here, year 5 to 7, it starts happening, and you're like, oh my god, I've been waiting for this one for so long, and it's finally happening, and it's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Now, one of the moments that I was looking forward to the most was the first full moon where all of the friends would spend it together. Padfoot, Wormtail, and Prongs basically learned how to turn themselves into animagi so that they could be by Remus's side when he transformed into a werewolf. And chapter 76 is the first time this happens. And Miss King Bean 89 writes full moons as very raw and unforgiving. So it pays off when the friends, the animagi, change everything for the better. Remus, transformed as a wolf, can kind of calm down while the other animals are around him and he doesn't hurt himself as much. And the chapter also ends on a warm and fuzzy note. Remus is extremely afraid of what the others will think when they see him transform.
Was it bad? He asked nervously. The transformation? It was pretty awful, James said honestly. The others nodded. You're so brave, Remus, Peter burst out. But afterwards, Sirius said, eager to remember. Afterwards, it was amazing. You weren't sure at first, but then You submitted to me, Remus said. I remember. I thought you couldn't remember anything that happened, James asked, cocking his head. I can't usually, Remus frowned. But last night was different. I remember it all. It wasn't me exactly, but it wasn't not me either. Does that make sense? No, Sirius laughed. Remus laughed too. You lot better get under the cloak. Madame Pomfrey's on her way. Could someone pass me my clothes? Sirius was the last to hide under the cloak. He was alive with joy and kept transforming back and forth, unable to stay still. When they absolutely had to go, he squeezed Remus's shoulder gently one last time. Didn't I tell you, Moony? Didn't I tell you? He whispered feverishly. You did, Remus smiled weakly. He lowered his voice so that no one else could hear him and looked at Sirius carefully. Was it scary? Was I scary? He had no idea what he looked like in wolf form. Sirius' expression did not flicker. No, he said firmly. You were beautiful.
This happens shortly after he realizes that he has feelings for Sirius. And Sirius saying that he was beautiful in Remus's eye in his most disgusting form is just so beautiful. And it's written so beautiful, and you were beautiful is one of the quotes that stays with the Marauders fan and one of the most famous quotes alongside with anything for Mooney. You were beautiful is also one of the most well-known quotes from the fanfiction. Now, as I said, Remus has realized that he has feelings for Sirius. By the time chapter 86 rolls around, Remus's angst about his crush on Sirius is already peaking. And it's Remus's sweet 16th birthday. We are rewarded with our first Wolfstar moment. With our first real Wolfstar moment, because they kiss. Remus and Sirius kiss while they are in the staircase. Remus was coming down, Sirius was going up, and they talk about their first kiss, and Sirius asks Remus if he ever had his first kiss, and Remus lies and says no, even though he had one. And Sirius says it's not that scary, you know, and then Remus grabs Sirius and kisses him. And it's very short and very impulsive. Both seem to be enjoying it, even if it lasts only for a brief second. This encounter does not mean the end of their angst. It never really ends. You realize that Sirius is panicking after their kiss because he's grown up in this very strict family who also had very strict views on homophobia. He also had the internalized homophobia going on, so after the kiss he panicked. He basically went back to the common room and grabbed Mary and made out with her. Just at that moment, Remus returned and saw Sirius making out with Mary, and it basically ripped his heart apart. It's just such a bittersweet moment because it starts off with their kiss, and then Sirius kind of destroys everything with his impulsiveness. Just gut-wrenching, and it was on Remus's birthday too. And at that moment, I just wanted to punch Sirius for that one. But yeah, overall, a very crucial moment, I think, in the whole story. The favorite chapter of almost every person is the Cornwall Chapter. In 1977, the whole friend group, Lily, James, Peter, Sirius, Remus, Mary, and Marlene, decide to go to Cornwall for summer vacation before their 7th year. Remus comes out to his friends. There's this very endearing moment where James tells everyone to behave themselves. Don't you dare treat Remus differently now. They are just normal teenagers in that chapter. They are just on that trip and just enjoying life, and it's basically the calm before the storm, because after this everything starts going down the drain basically. Like, yes, they have a year left at Hogwarts, like a 7th year left, but the 7th year is filled with all of those moments where the war is picking up and you realize that it's all coming at them faster than they would have expected. And Cornwall is kind of the last chapter where everything is fine, and it is also where the song finally plays. If you don't know, All the Young Dudes is a song by Matt the People. That is what the fanfiction is titled, after the song. And the song finally plays in that chapter. And while they were sitting at the beach, it comes on the radio. It hurts knowing what comes next, the betrayal and everything. And basically that the only person living by the 2000s is Mary. So, yeah. Now I want to go into some themes of All the Young Dudes, and starting with the music. The story is in the 70s and it is accommodated by a lot of music. David Bowie, T-Rex, so many artists. Involves a lot of songs that fit perfectly, like Black Dog and all of that stuff. And also how Sirius and Remus bond over the music, and how they think David Bowie is a wizard. The music just what brings them together. Amazing musical references always make a story more believable, in my opinion. How also David Bowie was kind of Remus's gay awakening. The whole story of sexuality and being in the closet. As I said, Remus discovers his sexuality basically through Grant, because Grant makes the first move on Remus and Remus just reciprocates and it all goes well. Remus never denies it that he is gay. I think he always has come to terms with it, and he never blames himself for something. He obviously he didn't show it to others, but I think he was pretty content with his sexuality, in comparison to Sirius, who was had very much internalized homophobia, didn't want to be called queer for a very long time. Remus and Sirius were hooking up. It wasn't queer till Sirius, because they weren't under the sheets. It's so stupid, and it just shows you that he was insecure. But then I'm glad that Remus eventually confronts him and Sirius has to come to terms with it, because Sirius slowly opens up. Obviously there's ups and downs in their whole relationship. You know, Wolfstar is very much it is toxic in a way that they are both teenagers, they are both growing up, they're both coming into the world, they're both dealing with their own fair share of trauma, but they also understand each other, and I think nobody understands each other like they do. I wouldn't say the relationship is toxic. I would just say that they are very bad communicators. They don't talk as much as they should in their relationship. That is something that they also learn, especially after Sirius returns from Azkaban, I think. But I love Wolfstar. I love them and I love everything about them, and I wish they had more time. I can't go every single Wolfstar moment in this. I really, really urge you to read the fanfiction as well if you're a Wolfstar and a Marauders fan. Another amazing thing is Jilly, James and Lily, their relationship. James always, since the beginning, he's always this is my future wife you're talking about. And first he's I do not have a crush on Evans. And then he's I do have a crush on Evans and she's my future wife and she will see it. There's so many attempts at him trying to impress her and he always fails. But then, as I said before, the event where Lily finally realizes that she has feelings too. It takes so much time, but it's so beautiful because James never had anything serious with anyone else. Lily was always his commitment and he never stepped away from it. Well, I don't think that would happen in real life, but I will permit it for them because they are so beautiful and perfect for each other. And Lily just does not take any shit from him. She puts him in his place, and James is so protective and so funny, and I love them together. I really, really do. I think their relationship is kind of what kept everyone going, especially in the rough times of war. Role of the teachers, especially Madame Pomfrey. Madame Pomfrey is one of the only people that knows about Remus's secrets, and she's the first one that actually cares for Remus after his transformation. Remus bonds with her, obviously. She had always protected him, she'd always helped him, she was the first one to understand his problem. Another teacher that is very important in a bad way is Dumbledore. And I am, if you know me, you know that I am an avid Dumbledore hater. I absolutely hate Dumbledore. I think he is the reason for every bad thing that has ever happened to anyone ever in these books. Like, not just in the fanfiction, Harry Potter as well. One little scene that happens after Lily and James passed away, where Remus is like, where's Dumbledore? Mary is like, well, Dumbledore is too busy accepting medals for winning the war, when Remus and Mary had just lost everyone that they ever loved. And I think it just shows how egotistical and absolutely disgusting Dumbledore is, that he recruited children for his war and then sacrificed the children so that he could earn the praises. It's disgusting, and that only repeats itself in the Harry Potter books. The war chapters, and it shows the realities of war. And I think one thing that is very scary is how they completely underestimated this war. Like, they went into this war and they were sure they were gonna win, they were sure they weren't gonna make it out alive. Then everything just escalated. The whole thing is, and it's so realistic, like, it starts off with this few very radical single people, radical groups where everyone is like, yeah, well, they had always been like this, you can't change them. And then they slowly start gaining more followers. Like, Voldemort starts gaining more followers. First thing where Lily, James, Remus and Sirius are at Diagon Alley shopping for the last year's supplies. And what happens is that Diagon Alley gets attacked, a terror attack basically. That is the first time where shit goes down. Remus describes how he is rooted to the spot, like he cannot do anything, and how he always imagined him being a hero and fighting for what is right, but when it actually came down to it, he was stuck in his roots. That is when I think it starts settling in. Then over the 7th year, they hear all kinds of stories about people being bitten by werewolves, Muggle families dying. Escalates into the Marauders eventually joining the Order of the Phoenix and going out on missions, and then they keep losing Order members to the war. Everything is surrounded by death. Even Lily and James's relationship gets kind of strained. One time James is attacked and they're even close to losing him, but Marlene luckily brings him back. And I think, as I said before, James and Lily's relationship had always brought light to them, but even their relationship was being stained by the war. When Marlene died, I think it was really the beginning of the end. And afterwards, Halloween 1981. I think it's so devastating because read through and then you are suddenly at the 2nd November. 31st October is not mentioned, Halloween is not mentioned, and you're like, what is going on? It turns out Remus wasn't around when Lily and James died. He was out on a mission and he returns and basically everyone is dead. Mary tells him that James died, Lily died, Peter died, and Sirius got caught and is now in Azkaban. Once again, Remus is all alone. It's very devastating. It is extremely devastating. I think what is even more devastating is that the whole group suspected Remus of being the traitor due to his involvement with the werewolves. Dumbledore basically takes advantage of Remus by sending him out as a werewolf to spy on other werewolves. Remus goes and joins them. First, it's just a few days, but then they actually abduct him, and then he stays like, I think 1.5 months. And the whole way this is written is very scary, and it made me very uncomfortable while reading because, and don't get me wrong, it's written very interestingly and it makes a lot of sense, and I think just how it's written is very impressive. In the whole pack mentality of the werewolves is, you know, you can actually understand where they're coming from. He stays with them to spy. He at first didn't even want to join, but he did it eventually because Dumbledore told him to. And I think what's really upsetting is that in the end, his best friends suspected Remus of being the traitor because of his involvement with the werewolves and because of his lycanthropy. The fact that for so many years the Marauders tried to get Remus's trust and told him that he was not the monster that everyone made him out to be, for them in the end to accuse him of being the spy due to his lycanthropy is just heart-wrenching. And I think Remus actually felt that way too, and it just spiraled into this whole self-hate thing, obviously, and his whole survivor's guilt, which I can completely understand. And also, I don't want to blame James, Lily, or Sirius, or anyone for blaming Remus, because war is war. They were underestimating it. And logically, Remus would have made the most sense. Yeah, the fact that he's away while the others died does also not help the situation. And yeah. But yeah, in defense of Peter Pettigrew, I think Peter was always very excluded from the group. You know the feeling when you're in a group of 3 and you always feel like the 5th wheel? I think that's how Peter felt, even though they were a group of 4. Never really could connect to Remus, I feel like. He was jealous of Sirius because Sirius was so close with James. Sirius was also always kind of mean towards Peter. I don't think Sirius meant it in a bad way, but I think Peter was a bit more sensitive towards it. There's one chapter written out of Peter's perspective, and it's called The Keeper. Basically shows how Peter thinks of himself. He always says the wrong thing, and that he missed the days bitterly where he had James all for himself, and that he had worshipped James ever since he could remember. He always said that he had been good, but not good enough. And the not good enough thing would stick to Peter, especially also in the Marauders or in his relationships in general or school as well. He had also had this relationship with a girl for a pretty long time, and he was the first one to get into a relationship of all the Marauders. They broke up and it was really glossed over, but here he actually admits that he's still suffering from the loneliness. It says he remembered feeling the loneliness the moment James and Sirius shook hands for the first time. And it just shows that Peter always felt excluded and always lonely, and I always felt like he said the wrong thing. And let's say the more sensitive people, the more lonely people, the more helpless people that end up being recruited for cults. So I understand where Peter is coming from. Now I think that is everything that I have to say about All the Young Dudes. This is a very long video. If I have not convinced you to read All the Young Dudes yet, you definitely should. It is a beautiful fan fiction. It is one of the best books I have ever read. You can read it for free on AO3. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know if you have read the fan fiction, if you're a Marauders fan, and what you like, what you didn't like. I would love to know your opinion. That is it for me today. I hope you have a great day or night, wherever you are. And yeah. See you next time. Bye!